Mysteries of the Great Pyramids worldwide still exist. Cultures across the Atlantic Ocean who never discovered each other's existence used their pyramids in similar ways. Today there are hundreds of pyramids standing all over the world, from India to Peru, from Alaska to Antarctica. Cultures separated by the Atlantic, and these cultures never discovered each other's existence. However, these giant triangular structures, these pyramids, aligned to cardinal directions encoded within them sacred geometry and mathematics, and these pyramids across the world were used as temples and sepulchres. Quote, as Keel says in Disneyland of the Gods, we know that pyramid building was once a universal practice throughout the whole world. Over 6,000 years ago, unknown people were assembling great pyramids in Mexico. Gigantic man-made mounds were constructed in China, Great Britain, even North America. Lately, we're finding them even in the Grand Canyon. They're said to be older than the Giza pyramids, the ones in the Grand Canyon, for example. And a remote Pacific island, while the Egyptians were still living in mud huts along the Nile. During World War II, pilots flying the hump, quote-unquote, reported seeing one or more massive pyramids standing silently in isolated Himalaya valleys. Of the ubiquitousness and similarity of pyramids, David Hatcher Childress states, Mayan pyramids are found from Central America to as far away as the Indonesian island of Java. The Pyramid of Suku on the slopes of Mount Lau near Sarakatra in central Java is an amazing temple with stone stelae, those are pillars, and a step pyramid that would match any in the jungle of Central America. The pyramid is in fact virtually identical to the pyramids of the ancient Mayan site at Huaxactan near Tikal. In speaking of the global civilization, Keel elucidates the weaknesses of the current archaeological paradigm. All these things seem to be interrelated, as if they were once part of some great civilization that was interconnected. A common culture that spread throughout the whole world and then died out. We have a reasonably complete history of the past 2,000 years and a half-baked archaeological reconstruction of the past 5,000 years. But there are so many gaps in our knowledge that the popular archaeology series really have very little merit. Indeed, we can't even be sure that the Egyptians built the Great Pyramid. In fact, the Great Pyramid is admittedly much more ancient than the Egyptians of history, as Hotema relates. When the great and most ancient Egyptians first saw the mysterious Sphinx and the Great Pyramid of Giza, only their tops projecting above the wind-blown sand of the desert, they knew no more about the purpose of these structures, their builders, or when they were built than we do. End quote. This is what Arcaria S. says in The Christ Conspiracy. Now, concerning the Great Pyramids of Giza, even by today's standards, they're absolute miracles in architecture, masonry, construction, mathematics, and even astronomy. The dimensions of these pyramids are extremely accurate, and the site was leveled to within a fraction of an inch over the entire base. This is comparable to the accuracy possible with modern construction and surveying methods and laser leveling. Quote, beneath the now removed outer layer of the pyramid's construction consists approximately 2,500,000 dressed stones, mostly yellow limestone, but with harder granite for certain interior features. The Great Pyramid total mass is estimated to be around 90 million cubic feet, and the weight is between 6 to 7 million tons. In order to put this into proper perspective, the highest cathedral nave in Europe would fit 3 times into its height, and its mass exceeds that of all the cathedral churches and chapels built in England since the beginning of Christianity. The Great Pyramid is often cited as the largest building on Earth, with twice the volume of 30 times the mass of New York's famous Empire State Building. The pyramid rests on an artificially leveled platform, and this is less than 22 inches thick, yet it is still almost perfectly level after all these thousands of years, with errors of less than an inch across its entire area. And this all despite supporting such an enormous weight. Supporting such a weight for thousands of years, it should have been crooked, and it's still level. The base of the pyramid is set out perfectly square, no mean feat of engineering in itself. This is all quoted by Alan F. Alford from his book titled Gods of the New Millennium, The Shattering Truth of Human Beings. So, reading this, we have to realize that history and archaeology, ancient history, has to be rewritten with all the recent findings concerning similar sepulchres and temples of pyramids found worldwide. Up until the last millennium, the pyramids were covered completely with smooth, polished limestone casing blocks. In other words, these pyramids were not an irregular-looking series of steps, as we see in the Giza pyramid, with missing capstones like they are now. They were covered with 115,000 10-ton casing sheets of polished limestone fitted so perfectly that a razor's edge could not cut between the casings. That is less than 1/50th of an inch. Egyptians wrote how it reflected the sun like a mirror on all sides. Today there are still a few polished casings left over at the base of one side. Quote, "Our first example of 20th century engineering in the Giza pyramids is the 6-sided limestone casing blocks, which were polished and precision, carved fit to perfectly fit with each other and the core stones, with joints measuring less than 1/15th of an inch. As if this was not incredible enough, all of those stones were found to be joined together with an extremely fine but strong cement, which had been applied evenly on semi-vertical faces across the surface expanding over 21 acres on the Great Pyramid alone. The second example is the internal passage of the Great Pyramid. These passages have been measured countless times. They have all been found to be perfectly straight and no deviations. In the case of the descending passage of less than 1/50th of an inch along its masonry part, over a length of 150 feet, that is truly incredible. If one includes the further 200 feet of passage bored through the solid rock, that error is less than 1/4 of an inch. So that is an even greater feat of engineering of the highest precision, comparable with 20th century technology, but supposedly achieved 4,500 years ago. Example number 3 is the machining of granite within the pyramids. One of the first archaeologists to carry out a thorough survey of the pyramid was Petrie. He was particularly struck by the granite coffer in the king's chamber. The precision with which the coffer had been carved out of a single block of extremely hard granite struck him as quite remarkable. What did they use to carve this out with? We don't have those instruments today. Petrie estimated that diamond-tipped drills would need to have been applied with pressure of 2 tons in order to hollow out the granite box. It was not a serious suggestion as to the method actually used, but simply his way of expressing the impossibility of creating that artifact using 19th century technology. It's still a difficult challenge, even with 20th century technology, and we're supposed to believe that Khufu achieved this at the time when the Egyptians possessed only the most basic copper hand tools? End quote. This is by Alan Alford, again in his book entitled Gods of the New Millennium, The Shattering Truth of Human Origins. Now, under these pyramids are large tunnels, hundreds of meters deep, drilled into the limestone bedrock with almost perfect 90-degree angles, and this kind of drilling technology only exists in our current paradigm for under a century. So how were they drilling all this and chiseling and lifting all these megalithic structures? In a famous meeting with a panel of Egyptologists, the author of, quote, Giza Power Plant, end quote, this is Christopher Dunn, he brought a slab of granite, a hammer, and a copper chisel and asked for a demonstration of how Egyptians were supposed to have chiseled out a 1,000-ton granite obelisk using simple hand tools. After a few whacks at it, the copper chisel had a deep indent and not a chip of granite was displaced. So this is an experiment showing that it was totally impossible. Quote, Chris Dunn found that many artifacts bore the same marks as conventional 20th century machining methods, that is, sawing, lathe, and milling practices. He was very interested, however, in the evidence of a modern processing technique known as trepanning. This process is used to excavate a hollow in a block of hard stone by first drilling and then breaking out and remaining core. Petrie had studied both the hollows and the cores and been astonished to find spiral grooves in the core, which indicated a drill feed rate of 0.100 inches per revolution of the drill. This initially seemed to be impossible. In 1983, Dunn had ascertained that industrial diamond drills could cut granite with a drill rotating speed of 900 revolutions per minute and a feed rate of 0.00002 inches per revolution. What these technicalities actually mean is that the ancient Egyptians were cutting their granite with a feed rate 500 times greater than our 1983 technology. This is again in Alan F. Alfred's book, Gods of the New Millennium, The Shattering Truth of Human Origins. Quote, on the granite core, the spiral of the cut sinks 1 inch in the circumference of 6 inches, a rate of plowing out which is astonishing. These rapid spiral grooves cannot be ascribed to anything but the descent of the drill into the granite under enormous pressure. This is what Flinders Petrie says in his book, The Pyramid and the Temples at Giza. Quote, wasn't it peculiar that at the supposed dawn of human civilization, more than 4,500 years ago, the ancient Egyptians had acquired what sounded like industrial-age drills, packing a ton or more of punch and capable of slicing through hard stones like hot knives through butter. This is by Graham Hancock in his book Fingerprints of the Gods. Quote, in the first and second pyramids at Giza, there are granite portcullises in the lower passage, which still baffle experts today. Firstly, their complex design suggests a use much more advanced than deterring robbers, the Egyptologist's explanation. It would take about 50 men to lift the portcullis slabs into place, yet the narrow corridors they're positioned into could have only been occupied by a few men at a time. This is what Flinders Petrie, in his book The Pyramids and the Temples at Giza, writes. The pyramids also encode very complex mathematics. These complex mathematics supposedly unknown to the simple ancient Egyptians at the time. To begin with, pyramids are located precisely on the 30th degree latitude and aligned to within 3 arc minutes of the true north. These are beyond coincidence, so it can be assumed that they could very accurately measure both latitude and longitude. The ratio of the Great Pyramid's height to its base perimeter is exactly pi 3.14. The King's Chamber and other rooms are perfect golden rectangles expressing the mathematical number of phi. The number of love is 1.618. The ratio between successive numbers in the Fibonacci sequence increasingly approach phi as you go, from 0 to 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and so on. And these numbers create what is known as the fractal golden spiral. It looks like a conch shell. Establishment or a cornucopia shell. Establishment Egyptologists say that these mathematical considerations are all coincidence, maintaining that ancient Egyptians didn't possess these concepts. But the reality is, the ancient Egyptians did possess higher advanced technology and mathematics, and they purposely encoded it into their construction, as so did the ancient Greeks, by the way. Now, quote, some routine mathematical games were built into the dimensions of the sarcophagus. For example, it had the interior value of 1166.4 liters and an external volume of exactly twice that, 2332.8 liters. Such a precise coincidence could not have been arrived at accidentally. Coincidentally, the walls of the coffer had been cut to machine-age tolerances by craftsmen of enormous skill and experience. This is what Graham Hancock in Fingerprints of the Gods states. In the king's chamber, the floor diagonal is precisely twice the room's height. This is what Flanders Petrie says. He says they managed to place the king's chamber perfectly where the vertical section of the pyramid was halved, where the area of the horizontal section was half that of the base, where the diagonal from corner to corner was equal to the length of the base, and where the width of the face was equal to half the diagonal of the base. Do you suppose these mathematics were accidental? Of course not. Egyptologists say that the Giza pyramids were built for 3 pharaohs over the course of 100 years. There are over 2.5 million stones, so if you build 24 hours a day for 100 years, that means fitting one stone, average 3.5 tons, into place every 8.5 minutes. That's physically impossible. Using current technology, multiple cranes and work crews, we still could not make that kind of time, nor could we match the craftsmanship. So what is going on here? 6 million tons of stone, underground channels, tunnels, chambers, corridors, 45 to 90 degree shafts, pies and phi ratios and golden rectangles and other mathematical inclusions, perfect cardinal alignments, right angles, astronomical, astrological considerations, and flawless masonry. And all this after thousands and thousands of years without sinking under its very thin slab that it was placed on? How did ancient man, the whole world over, build these huge, magnificent pyramids? They stacked stones so heavy, many of which cannot be lifted into place with the cranes and technology machinery we have today. They quarried these stones from many miles away and fitted them together so seamlessly that you cannot fit a pin or a blade between them. Also in Egypt, tens of thousands of diorite bowls have been found with hieroglyphs engraved on them. Diorite is one of the hardest stones on the planet, harder than iron, yet intricate inscriptions have been made not through the use of chisels or scraping, but some unknown ancient technology. Whatever it was capable of etching lines 1 to 150th of an inch wide. Often it sets a parallel line separating a mere 1 to 1/30th of an inch. The same kind of workmanship that has been found in vases, urns, and other pottery unearthed in the Pyramid of Zoser. And Graham Hancock says, there was no technology known to have been available to the ancient Egyptians capable of achieving such results. Nor, for that matter, would any stone carving today be able to match them, even if he were working with the best tungsten carbide tools. The implication, therefore, is that an unknown or secret technology had been put to use in ancient Egypt. Now, concerning the Sphinx of Giza. Well, in the beginning, Egyptologists said that it was less than 5,000 years old. They've come now to the conclusion that it is much older than 10,000 years old, based on the weathering alone of the stone. Geologists confirm that it has been eroded by massive amounts of water, which has not been present in the Sahara for at least 10,000 years, when they had a tropical climate. Egyptologists claim this weathering is just wind, sand erosion, but geologists like Robert Soch finds that very hard to swallow. Quote, in October 1991, Dr. Robert Soch, a geologist at Boston University, presented detailed evidence that the Sphinx was thousands of years older than the commonly accepted date of 2500 BC. His conclusion was based on the weathering profile of the limestone rock out of which the Sphinx had been carved. Visitors to the Sphinx today can clearly see the vertical weathering profile in the limestone trench around the Sphinx. This erosion, according to the science of geology, could only be the result of prolonged rainfall, in contrast to the dry weather experienced in Egypt since 2500 BC. Based on the climate evidence, Soch estimated that the Sphinx had to be between 9,000 and 12,000 years old when the climate in Egypt was much wetter. This is Alan Alford, Statement Gods of the New Millennium, The Shattering Truth of Human Origins. Quote, in fact, although Egypt is often given the honor of being the originator of much human culture, the Egyptians themselves recorded that they were the inheritors of a great civilization that came from elsewhere. Indeed, the Egyptian culture seemingly appeared out of nowhere at a high level of development, as did the Sumero-Mesopotamian and South American. The fact is explainable if the citizens and civilians were advanced groups coming from elsewhere, from lands that had been destroyed by climate change, war, or other cataclysm. This is The Christ Conspiracy by Acaria. The man-made mountain in Mexico is a ziggurat 3 times the size of the Great Pyramid. The base length of the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan is almost identical in length to the base of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Where are those odds? Teotihuacan means the place where men become gods. They claim their pyramid and temples were instruments for transforming the soul after death, exactly as the Egyptians did. This theme is all over the ancient world. Ancient Tibetans, the Egyptians, the Native Americans, all had complex systems, multi-stage challenges for recently deceased souls to overcome in the afterlife. Specific stages of the difficult cultures' afterlife journeys even match up. The Mayans and the Egyptians both believed in stellar rebirth, where kings, pharaohs, and heroes died and are reborn as stars. Quote, archaeologists all over the world have realized that much of the prehistory as written in the existing textbooks is inadequate, some of the time simply totally wrong. It has been suggested that the changes now at work in prehistory herald the shift of a new paradigm, made necessary by the collapse of the first paradigm. This is by Colin Renfrew in Before Civilization. I leave a link below for you for this. Tan near Tikal. In speaking of the global civilization, Keel elucidates the weaknesses of the current archaeological paradigm. All these things seem to be If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.